We've learned that China's chief negotiator literally laughed in the face of Donald Trump in the Oval Office during recent trade talks that are going on, which, of course, as I'll show you momentarily, Donald Trump is claiming were just so extraordinarily successful. But let me sort of set it up for you, and then we'll get into the new details. Donald Trump campaigned on knowing all about trade policy, and he's going to fix trade policy, and it's going to be great for the little guy and for middle America, and he's going to end that trade imbalance with China, and everything's going to be great, and everybody's just going to be winning bigly. Donald Trump instated some tariffs. It turns out that they actually caused the opposite. Rather than reducing the trade deficit has increased to record levels. Donald Trump now is claiming on Twitter that maybe he's not going to need more new tariffs, which were scheduled to be enacted on March 1st, because things are just going so well in his conversations with China. He tweeted over the weekend, quote, "I am pleased to report that the U.S. has made substantial progress in our trade talks with China on important structural issues, including intellectual property protection, technology transfer, agriculture, services, currency, and many other issues. As a result of these very productive talks, I will be delaying the U.S. increase in tariffs, now scheduled for March 1. Assuming both sides make additional progress, we will be planning a summit for President Xi and myself at Mar-a-Lago, of course, to conclude an agreement, a very good weekend for the U.S. and China." So the first question is, did things actually go well, or is Trump realizing that the tariffs he's already enacted are disastrous for the United States, and he's trying to find a way out of enacting further tariffs? The answer to that question is probably yes, but let's put that issue aside just for a second and talk about what took place in the Oval Office. It turns out that Trump exposed in these talks, including a briefly filmed piece of it, that he doesn't understand even the most minor elements of how trade works, and was literally laughed at by a Chinese negotiator who was in the room in the Oval Office. I'll set the stage for you. Either before or after, at some point in the process of these trade discussions, they let cameras into the Oval Office. There's trade officials there. The Chinese Vice Premier Liu He is in there. The topic is trade agreements. But Donald Trump gets into this really weird back and forth with Robert Lighthizer, who's the White House's top negotiator. And they start arguing about MOUs. An MOU is a memorandum of understanding. And they start arguing over whether an MOU is a real agreement or merely some kind of like pre-agreement agreement, but you still need the actual agreement later. You'll be able to tell from this video I'm going to play for you that Donald Trump clearly thinks that the MOU is just a sort of, well, we'll sort of agree to do some stuff maybe in principle, but Trump doesn't really believe an MOU is worth anything. The reality is that MOUs are contracts. Trump doesn't like the name. More than likely, I'm guessing this is because Donald Trump has had MOUs signed for real estate deals, and he ended up getting screwed. So he thinks that it's the same thing in politics, that an MOU between two countries isn't worth anything. But it is a contract. So what I'm going to play for you here is video of Donald Trump arguing about this with his own top negotiator, Robert Lighthizer, and Trump in the midst of arguing with him. It's just amazing. He's negotiating with the Chinese, but he's arguing with his own negotiator over the semantic difference between an MOU and a deal and an agreement and a contract. You have to sort of listen carefully. But when Lighthizer explains to Trump that he's wrong, that MOUs are contracts, you hear a laugh in the background, and everybody in the room has said that that was the Chinese Vice Premier, Liu He, who can't believe what's going on.
I think the MOU is going to be very short term. No, we expect to go into, I don't like MOUs because they don't mean anything. To me, they don't mean anything. I think you're better off just going into a document. I was never a fan of an MOU.
So an MOU is a contract. It's the way trade agreements are generally used. People refer to it like it's a term sheet. It's not a term sheet. It's an actual contract between the two parties. Yes. A memorandum of understanding is a binding agreement between two people. And that's what we're talking about. It's detailed. It covers everything. in great detail. It's just called a memorandum of understanding. It's a legal term. It's a contract.
And would you think that that would be a very long-term deal, sir?
Yes, I think so. Yes.
Contracts last while they last. There's no term. They last while they last.
Mr. President, on North Korea.
By the way, I disagree. I think that a memorandum of understanding is not a contract to the extent that we want.
So you hear that laughter in the background, which again was the Chinese vice premier who's there to participate in these negotiations. Can you imagine coming to the Oval Office all the way from China to try to avert more tariffs, which are just mutually damaging to the U.S. and to China? And Donald Trump is having a semantic disagreement with his top negotiator in front of cameras, but not one that is even particularly relevant. He just doesn't agree with the name of what these agreements are. His top negotiator says this is not just like a general term sheet. These are agreements. These are contracts. These are binding, period. And even after this, Trump just continues for another minute harping on this semantic disagreement.
We're doing a memorandum of understanding that will be put into a final contract, I assume. But to me, the final contract is really the thing, Bob, and I think you mean that too, is really the thing that means something. A memorandum of understanding is exactly that. It's a memorandum of what our understanding is. But to me, the contract is, the real question is, Bob, so we do a memorandum of understanding, which frankly you could do or not do. I don't care if you do it or not. To me, it doesn't mean very much. But if you do a memorandum, how long will it take to put that into a final binding contract?
What? From now on, we're not using the word memorandum of understanding anymore. We're going to use the term trade agreement, all right?
Okay. Right.
No more. We'll never use the term.
Good.
We'll have the same document. It's going to be called a trade agreement. We're never going to use MOU again.
Are they going to put that into another agreement?
What we'll have will be a trade agreement. If we have major hurdles. I don't want to put the cart in front of the horse. Assuming you decide on an agreement, it'll be signed by the two people. It'll be a trade agreement between the United States and China.
Good. I like that much better. I like that term much better.
Agree with that?
Okay, agreed.
Yes.
I wouldn't go into a memorandum. I would go right into a trade agreement. Either you're going to make a deal or you're not. To have these other agreements doesn't mean anything.
That word again.
Because they're not that meaningful, in my opinion. But anyway, I like that much better.
This is unbelievable. This is notable for a bunch of different reasons. First of all, Trump just doesn't get it, okay? It was explained to him multiple times in this video that the MOU is a binding contract. And he insists that it's not. He keeps saying either we're going to do a deal or we're not. I don't care about MOUs. But his chief negotiator, you can see how the propagandizing of all of this stuff works and how Trump ends up thinking that he's right and that he's smarter. Because Trump is holding up in an embarrassing way the entire substantive discussion about what will the agreement say? Are we tariffing or not, right? Those are the relevant questions. Trump is holding up the entire thing over his understanding of what's the difference between an MOU and whatever else. His chief negotiator, clearly just to placate Trump, not because Trump's right, because he sees that it's becoming a huge distraction, says, hey, you know what? We're not going to call it an MOU. We're literally going to have the exact same document, but we're going to change the title to a trade agreement. This doesn't substantively change anything. It merely placates Trump, but then Trump actually thinks he made a good point. We knew this was happening behind the scenes, Pat. We would learn about how behind the scenes staffers are endlessly frustrated with how Trump just doesn't understand stuff and they have to dumb things down or appear to acquiesce, when in reality, we're talking about semantics and a 70-something-year-old man who just doesn't get it. We just saw what normally happens behind the scenes, which is increasingly frustrated adults in the room go, this guy doesn't get it. You want us to call it an agreement instead of an MOU? They're just crossing out the name and naming it something else, but it's the exact same thing.
Yeah, for us, the veil has been totally lifted. The guy claimed to be a master negotiator. We now know that not to be true. He claimed to be a master when it comes to trade policy. We also know that that's not true, and he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about there. But for his base of supporters who watch that video and see that, wow, Trump persuaded people in the room to no longer call that piece an MOU, it's called something else now, they view that as a victory.
And this is the type of thing that later Trump will tell, if we didn't have video of this, okay, this is one of those things where Trump will go to a rally and he'll have written into his speech how he came in and forced a deal rather than just an MOU. If we didn't have video, that minute and a half becomes at a rally, Trump saying, listen, they came in, the Chinese came in, and my negotiators came in. And if it weren't for me, they would have come out of this thing with just an MOU and it wouldn't have gone anywhere. But I went in there and I negotiated because I'm a good negotiator. And I said, we're not doing an MOU. We're doing an agreement and we're getting it done. And it's going to be binding. And then his MAGA hat wearing crowd all starts cheering. We now have the video of this, and we saw it was a really dumb semantic disagreement, which led to people who understand stuff realizing this guy's a moron. If he wants us to change the name of the document, we'll change the name. That would be a minute and a half to 2 minutes at a speech of Donald Trump claiming some kind of big art of the deal negotiation victory. The only other thing I want to say about this, understand now that in the same way that the adults in the room are conceding here and saying, we'll call it whatever the hell this guy wants because we've just got to move on and talk about the substance. This probably leads to a lot of people acquiescing to Trump's stupid demands because he just doesn't get what is even being discussed. And in order to move things along, my guess is this type of thing where everybody says, oh my God, just call it whatever the hell he wants so we can move on. It's probably happening all the time. And in some cases, it's probably more actionably significant, materially significant than this particular example. This reminds me, this allows me to preview, by the way, we are planning an upcoming segment on an issue in the United States, which is an issue of culture. It's an issue of politics. It's an issue of economics and class and a lot of different things. The growing intellectual divide in the United States of America. This is a real thing. This video is a great opportunity for me to mention that that's something that we're working on. And we'll have that coming up for you at some point very, very soon. Let's take a break. Make sure to give us a like on Facebook at facebook.com/David Pakman Show. Plenty more to discuss.